Akram here, and in this tutorial I'm going to share with you how to use the Lathe Modifier when spline modeling. So in our previous example, we have created a model of bacon. We have a plane that we put an image of bacon on as a reference, and we traced it out with the line tool. From there, we added an extrude modifier to extrude the bacon and give it some height and turn it into a 3D model. Now that I've got my bacon, it's best if we don't eat food off the ground, so I'm going to create a plate to set this bacon on. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my reference image for the bacon because I don't really need that anymore. So over in my Scene Explorer here, I'm simply going to turn off the eyeball icon next to the bacon reference image, and I'm going to leave my bacon model turned on. What a lathe modifier does, unlike the extrude that simply gives an object height, lathe does a extrusion from a side all the way 360 around. So you're basically taking a cross section or a side view of an object, typically an object that is circular in nature, and then extruding it along that radius. So in our case, we're going to take the side profile of a plate and extrude that using the lathe. And because we're doing a side profile, I'm either going to want to do that in the front view or the left view. I'm going to do it in the left view here. So I'm going to select my left view and I'm going to go to modify. And I'm going to kind of go off to the side because I want my bacon kind of in the central location of the plate. Now, we could have an image, a side view, and an image to reference, or we could kind of play this by memory and get creative as to what we feel like a side view of a plate would look like. So in my line tool, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start right here around the midsection of the bacon. I'm going to turn my snap on so that I can snap to the points of the grid. Before, we didn't really use the snap a whole lot because the bacon was more of a freeform shape. But in this case, I want to make my plate a little bit more straight. So I've got my plate coming across right about here. A plate is not completely flat. It has a little bit of a lip up, and it also has a little bit of a lip below to keep the plates from wobbling on a table. But one of the key things when you're doing a lathe, the center of the lathe should be as straight as possible to ensure that it is extruding around that radius correctly. And obviously that is not straight, but I can refine that. So once I have my points connected, I'm going to uncheck the snap so that I can click on my points a little bit easier. I'm actually going to turn snap back on so that I can ensure that that left edge here is accurately straight. I'm going to turn snap back off because the rest of it here can be a little bit more freeform. So I'm going to take this point here and I'm going to kind of bring this in here. Oh, that looks a lot better right there. Once you have the side section view of your plate to your liking, we are going to go ahead and we're going to lathe this. So to do a lathe, in your Modify tab, you're going to make sure that you've turned the vertice mode off and that you've got the full object selected. You're going to go to the Modify tab, you're going to scroll down, and you're going to find Lathe. And by default, it might do something really weird like this, so that's not what you want. Don't worry, we're going to fix it. So the first thing you want to do is determine where you're rotating that extrude from. By default, it's going to kind of center that on the shape. We want to do it from the minimum, which is the outer edge of where we drew that line. And if I actually minimize my viewport, you can see that already it pretty much created that shape there. I do want to make a few changes to this. Obviously, I want to make sure that this is 360, and I want to weld the core. And you'll notice if I turn weld core off and I come in here, I've got this little bitty gap. And it's always going to give a little bit of a gap depending on how you drew your vertices and your splines. I want to give a welded cap so that it infuses everything together, making this one full solid shape. Now that looks pretty good. You'll notice that the edges of the plate look a little polygonal, so I can increase the segments. Whenever you're creating a shape that is curved in any way, 3D models have to create more segments of triangles to create those curves. The more segments, the smoother the shape will be. And by default, I've only got 16. But if I increase this up to, let's say, 50, and I come in, I get a really nice curve on that plate. But again, remember, if you are modeling for games especially, the data of those 3D models has to be as lightweight as possible. So what my suggestion is to kind of move it down until you find the point where you can live with. And I think for me, I think 30 is actually going to be a fairly decent amount of curvature there. I don't need anything more than that. And again, also consider how close the player will ever get to this object. So in my case, I'm going to stick with 30. Now, what you'll notice is that I did not draw my plate section view as big as really I needed. It kind of looked right in the left view, but from the front view, I just don't have it wide enough. One of the things that I can do is actually manipulate the original spline. So over in the modifier tab, you'll notice that the Lathe modifier is actually stacked above our section spline of the plate, the line spline. And it's in the stacking mode because all modifiers are editable within 3D Studio Max. So I can stack modifiers, turn them on and off, and still access the original to a certain extent, allowing me to make changes to the original spline without having to go back and add the modifier a second time. What I can do is I can go to the original spline, click on vertice, that'll turn off in the viewport the spline itself, and I can select the edge of my plate. I can move those splines so they're more central on the bacon, so now they're a little bit further in, and I think I'm going to stick with that. Now I'm going to return to my lathe. And I have increased the plate a little bit. I could play with those vertices if I wanted to. In my case, I really just need it a little bit bigger. So I'm actually going to go into the top view here, select my plate. I'm going to use the scale, uniform scale, to quickly just scale up the size of my plate so that I can get all of the bacon on the plate. And then using the move tool, I can position that plate where I want it. So now I've got my shape correctly sized. Now you'll notice that my plate looks almost black, but it is showing that it's light blue. Part of the reason is it didn't know which direction the surfaces are facing. It doesn't know if they were facing up or down. And it appears that the surfaces are facing down and not up. So what I need to do is in the Lathe Modifier tool, I need to set flip normals. And that will flip the surfaces so that they are facing in the correct position, flipping the normals up so that we can see the material, or in this case, the matte color for the standard color for this shape. So now I have a nice little plate, and you'll notice if I rotate this in the perspective view, I've got that little lip just down at the bottom of the plate that is typically on plates for stability purposes, and I've got the nice edge of the plate as well. So this is how you use the Lathe tool to create extrusions from a section view of your model. Now we did a full 360, but just for show, if I were to change that, I could create a Pac-Man image, for instance, or pie shape, or whatever the case may be. And you can do this in more complex shapes as well. We could do a vase or a wine glass that has a very specific side silhouette, and that's how you use the Lathe Modifier in spline modeling. I hope you found this lesson informative. And don't forget to check out other lessons and tutorials on the channel. So what are you waiting for? Get creative today.